The Lost World. English summary story. I used to listen to Mr. Hungerton talk about economics, but it was really boring. As a journalist, I went to work at the Daily Gazette and spoke to my boss, Mr. McCardle, asking for an adventurous mission to write exciting articles. He suggested exposing a fraud instead, mentioning Professor Challenger, a famous but mysterious zoologist. Challenger had returned from a South American expedition but refused to share details, throwing journalists out when they asked. My boss tasked me with meeting Challenger, even though he hated journalists. I decided to write Challenger a letter pretending to be interested in science and asking to discuss scientific debates. Challenger replied, allowing me to visit but warning against any press. The next day, I visited Professor Challenger's house as arranged. His servant asked if I had the letter and then let me in. A woman, who seemed more French than English, stopped me. She cautioned me about Challenger's difficult nature, advising not to argue with him as he could be dangerous. She offered help if he became too much to handle. Inside Challenger's study, I met the professor. He had a large head, a big black beard, and a huge chest and arms. I introduced myself as the student interested in discussing Weismann and Darwin. Trying to impress him, I babbled about scientific terms, but he saw through my act and accused me of being a journalist. He attacked me, and we tumbled out into the street, where a policeman arrived. I declined to press charges, and the situation diffused. Back inside, Mrs. Challenger scolded her husband for his behavior. He playfully put her on a pedestal until she said, "Please," several times, and then he kissed her. Once calm, Challenger shared his South American journey. He went to the Amazon to check on observations made by scientists Wallace and Bates. He befriended the Kakama Indians, who told him about a sick man. By the time he reached the man, he had passed away, which surprised Challenger for a specific reason. The story progresses with the meeting's chaotic events, the revelation of Challenger's journey to South America, and his encounter with the Kakama Indians. Challenger showed me pictures by a man named Maple White, an artist from the U.S. who visited South America. His drawings included Indian scenes, animals like turtles and alligators, and an odd image of a cliff with a strange rock tower and a peculiar lizard. Challenger believed these drawings were from a real place and showed me a photograph of the cliff and tower, pointing out a large bird-like creature on the top. He then presented a wing, claiming it belonged to a pterodactyl, not a bat or bird. He explained that a volcanic event raised a rock area millions of years ago, preserving ancient creatures like the pterodactyl. Challenger had shared these findings with other scientists, but they laughed at him. He invited me to a lecture that night to witness their reaction. At the Zoological Institute Hall, Mr. Waldron started a lecture about the planet's history, explaining the evolution from simple sea life to mammals. He then discussed dinosaurs, assuring the audience that these creatures were extinct long before humans existed. During Mr. Waldron's lecture, someone interrupted, asking about extinct reptiles before humans. It turned out to be Professor Challenger, who repeatedly interrupted the lecture, disputing the scientific accuracy. This led to chaos, with students joining in. Eventually, Challenger demanded that Mr. Waldron stop making scientifically inaccurate statements. He claimed to be a prophet of science, comparing himself to Galileo and Darwin, causing an uproar. Professor Summerlee, a renowned scientist, challenged Challenger's discoveries and location accuracy, to which Challenger was evasive. Challenger proposed an expedition to verify his claims. When asked who would go, I volunteered, thinking about Gladys. Lord John Roxton, an experienced traveler, also volunteered. Challenger approved their involvement, and the meeting ended. I left the hall and was approached by Lord Roxton, who invited me to his house, filled with exotic items. He offered me a drink and a cigar to discuss our upcoming adventure. Lord Roxton and I sat down to chat. He shared that he hadn't planned to join the expedition but was drawn by the potential for discovering something new. He showed me a rifle he used against slave traders in Peru, emphasizing the importance of fighting for justice. He also handed me another gun. He asked about my meeting with Professor Challenger, and I explained briefly. Then, he placed a map of South America on the table, expressing his love for the region and its potential for incredible discoveries. We discussed more, and I left. Eventually, the expedition was set. Professor Summerlee, Lord John Roxton, and I headed towards the boat. Before boarding, Challenger appeared, stating that the truth mattered more than thanking us. He handed over sealed instructions to be opened in Manaus at a specific date and time, emphasizing secrecy about our exact location. He bid us farewell, expressing disdain for journalists but acknowledging Roxton's potential for the expedition. We traveled across the Atlantic to Para, Brazil, hired guides who knew the Amazon, and finally reached Manaus. On the specified date and time, we gathered around a table as Lord John opened the envelope. As we opened the envelope from Professor Challenger, we found it was blank, prompting Summerlee to laugh and accuse Challenger of being a fraud. Unexpectedly, Challenger arrived, a few minutes late, and announced we could start our journey the next day. The expedition began up the river on a boat named Esmeralda. We navigated wide waters and eventually entered a narrower tributary. After reaching an Indian village on August 2, Challenger sent the boat back and arranged for 2 canoes with Indian guides to continue our journey. As we traveled deeper into the forest, colossal trees towered above us. On the 3rd day, we heard drums, signaling potentially hostile indigenous tribes. While some feared an attack, our professors were engrossed in their scientific discussions or fascinated by the wildlife around them. We encountered rapids where Challenger had lost most of his earlier photos and carried the canoes past them. Continuing on foot, we traversed various terrains, from tropical forests to bamboo thickets. Eventually, we reached an open area devoid of trees. During our journey, Challenger claimed to have spotted a gigantic bird, suggesting it was a pterodactyl, but others dismissed it as just a large bird. The adventure continued as we explored these unknown and diverse terrains, always on the lookout for new discoveries. After witnessing the strange bird, we encountered the red cliffs depicted in Maple White's picture, with the rock tower nearby. We camped at the cliff's base, near the high rock tower where Challenger claimed the pterodactyl was perched. Summerlee seemed to start believing Challenger's claims at this point. Challenger, however, posed a challenge. How could we ascend to the plateau as Maple White had done in his previous expedition? As Lord John suggested exploring to the west, we found Maple White's old campsite. There, we discovered a skeleton, which Challenger identified as Maple White's friend, James Clover. His broken bones suggested a fatal fall. We then found markings and arrows on the cliffs, which led us to a cave entrance. However, the passage was blocked by rocks. We spent days exploring around the cliffs and made a camp. During a dark night with no moon, something remarkable occurred, but what it was remained a mystery. In the midst of our despair, we heard the flapping of gigantic wings and caught a glimpse of a pterodactyl in the firelight, leaving us astonished. The following day, we searched around the cliffs again, finding no way up. However, Challenger suddenly declared he'd found a way to the top. Using ropes, we ascended to the tower summit, where Challenger pointed out a gap between the tower and the plateau. He then instructed me to cut down a tall tree, fashioning a bridge. With the tree as our bridge, we crossed to the other side, but upon reaching the plateau, the bridge disappeared, leaving us stranded. Gomez, seeking revenge as Lopez's brother, revealed himself, admitting to sabotaging our only means of descent. Lord John managed to shoot him, but we were now trapped. Using ropes, we hoisted up some supplies, preparing for an uncertain future. Exploring the plateau, which we dubbed Maple White Land, we discovered enormous tracks, not of a bird, but of a dinosaur, according to Professor Challenger. As we ventured further, an opening in the forest revealed 5 incredible and unimaginable creatures before us. In the heart of our exploration, we encountered 2 adult creatures and 3 young ones, resembling colossal kangaroos but with reptilian skin. Lord John readied his gun, while the professors, caught in wonder, held hands like children. Discussing the potential reactions back in England, Professor Challenger predicted skepticism and accusations of fraud, especially if we brought back photographs or evidence. Yet, he speculated that perhaps presenting a dinosaur would sway skeptics. Reaching a vast hole with water at its base housing pterodactyl nests, the creatures attacked us when Professor Challenger approached too closely. Thankfully, we managed to escape, albeit narrowly. That night, Lord John approached me, mentioning a specific location with a volcanic hole of a distinctive blue color, a detail I remembered well. When I inquired, he dismissed it cryptically. The subsequent day, fatigued from our escapades, we rested in camp. As night fell, we heard distressing sounds from the forest, the echoes of a prehistoric tragedy. Moments later, a giant creature approached our camp. Lord John, with remarkable courage, used a burning torch to confront it, revealing the creature's fear of fire, a monster eventually fleeing from the light. The following day, we discovered iguanodon remains and concluded that the creature was an Allosaurus. While some proposed leaving, Challenger was resolute about further exploration, setting the stage for more daring encounters in this strange, prehistoric land. Professor Challenger was surprised at Professor Summerlee's decision. He felt that if something happened to them, no one in London would know about their discoveries. They discussed returning to London to prepare for a bigger expedition but felt they should first make a map of Maple White Land. Since there were no high mountains to see the whole plateau, Challenger suggested climbing a tall tree to make a map. While climbing, he encountered a frightening red ape-like face that quickly disappeared. After reaching the top, he saw a lake and drew a map. He described the ape-like creature to his friends, suggesting it might be a link between apes and humans. Summerlee urged them to leave, now having the map, but Challenger was intrigued. That night, excited by his adventure, he went alone to explore the central lake, discovering human presence in caves and recognizing creatures, like a Stegosaurus, from Maple White's drawings. As he returned to camp, an Allosaurus chased him, leading to a terrifying fall into a deep hole. When I woke up, I noticed a terrible smell and found myself surrounded by old meat pieces in a dinosaur trap made by humans. As I climbed out and hurried back to the camp, I heard a rifle shot but found no one there, just blood on the ground. I remembered Zambo and saw him still at his camp, signaling hope. I threw a letter to him, hoping an Indian with him could take it to the nearest village for help. In the morning, Sir John urgently woke me, insisting we gather rifles and food to flee. He recounted being captured by hundreds of apes who divided the plateau with the Indians. The apes tied up Summerlee and him but treated Challenger differently, almost like their leader. There was an ongoing conflict between the apes and Indians. The ape men had gruesome rituals, including tearing prisoners' arms and throwing them off the cliffs, similar to what happened to James Clover, Maple White's friend. Yesterday, 4 of the Indians were thrown off the cliffs. This morning, Sir John managed to escape and brought back guns. After resting, we hurried to where the ape men lived and hid behind trees. What I witnessed was unforgettable. An open grassy area near the cliffs where the ape men's leaf-made houses rested in trees. There were about 108 ape men gathered, with a group of Indians and Professor Summerlee. Among them were 2 distinct figures, Professor Challenger and the King of the Ape Men. Both were hairy but differed in hair color. Challenger's was black, the King's was red. The ape men pushed victims off the cliffs. First, an Indian, then Summerlee. When the ape men targeted Summerlee, Challenger tried to stop them, but the King pushed him aside. That's when Lord John shot the King, and Challenger urged us to flee. As John kept firing, we ran to our camp but heard footsteps. John found surviving Indians outside. Afraid of the ape men finding our location, we left with the Indians to find a new hiding spot. That night, Challenger approached me, asking not to mention his resemblance to the ape men's king. I assured I'd write only the truth. The next morning, we headed to the Indian caves, crossing an open area to the lake. Indians approached in canoes, thrilled to see us. An elder from the group came forward. After we made camp near the lake following the victory, the Indians invited us to stay in their caves, but Lord John felt it unwise. We observed the lake's creatures and the plateau's wonders, yet our desire was to return home. The Indians, relying on the safety of our rifles, never provided help when we asked for ropes or wood. Eventually, the young chief handed us a piece of bark, a seemingly important item. Pondering its significance, we discovered marks on it, 18 in total, the same as the number of caves above. With a cross on the bark and a longer cave, we surmised it led to the other side of the cliff. This revelation solved our puzzle. Equipped with torches, we stealthily explored the cave in the dark to evade the Indians' notice. Finally, arriving at a rocky wall, doubt emerged. But Lord John was certain, it was the right cave. We inspected the map's mark once more. After exploring the cave with the map, we discovered the right path that led us closer to the ground. Excited, we returned to our camp and secretly moved our belongings to the cave. We managed to take everything, including a large box, down the cliff. Upon our return to Para and the subsequent journey back to England, news of our discoveries reached there before us. At the Zoological Institute, we shared our adventures with about 5,000 people. But not everyone believed our tales, claiming we lacked proof. To silence the skeptics, Professor Challenger revealed a young pterodactyl. The crowd was stunned, some even screamed, when it flew above their heads before escaping through an open window. That incident made everyone believe our incredible story, and they hailed us as heroes. Later, over dinner at Lord John's house, he revealed finding valuable stones near the volcanic holes similar to the ones found near the diamond mines in South Africa. The stones were worth a fortune. Each of us had plans for our share of the money, from building private museums to preparing new expeditions. So, even though my romantic adventure didn't end as I hoped, I was ready for whatever the future might bring. Lord John didn't say much but offered me his hand in a sign of camaraderie,